Previous webinars are also available on the link below, learninglive.com/digital. Membership for the LPI is both for individuals and for teams. For individuals, we provide a host of benefits along with all the support that you need as a learning professional in this environment to be able to help you get ahead of the competition, along with for whole teams. So feel free to take a look at that on our website. But today's event is all about making learning matter. So I'm going to start by introducing, for those early arrivers, thank you very much for doing so. Feel free to post in the chat where you're from, and also the organizations maybe that you're from as well. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time today. We've got Graham Hutchings joining us, Jennifer Stevens and Bob Huff, who are all listed on the page below. But today's event, I'll just run through the synopsis if you haven't already read it, is making learning matter. So nearly half of employees believe their companies isn't adequately equipping them for the future performance. In our upcoming webinar today, we explore how creating a culture of continuous learning can drive your organization's success. So we're joined by myself and Graham Hutchings, CEO of ProfitAbility, as he hosts an interactive discussion with Jennifer Stevens, Commercial Capability Manager at PepsiCo, and Bob Huff, Global Learning Lead at Cargill, sharing real-world examples and practical tips. And we're going to explore topics of how to create the organizational mindset for learning, discover the strategies to establish a culture that values and prioritizes learning at every level of your organization. Thank you for those joining us. I'm just taking you through the synopsis for this upcoming Learning Live digital event. The importance of championing learning as the main driver of business performance. Explore how cultivating a culture of learning can directly impact business performance, driving innovation effectively and agility. Identifying capability gaps and closing them. Learning effective approaches to identifying gaps within your workforce and how to bridge them effectively. And adapting learning elements to different contexts, tailoring learning strategies to suit diverse contexts, whether you're a multinational or an SME. Right. Well, thank you very much for everyone who's joining us. As you do so, feel free to break out the chat page, because we're going to be using that a lot today. It's an open conversation that we're going to be having with Graham, Jennifer, and Bob, who I'll be handing over to shortly. But yeah, thank you very much for everybody who's joining us today from every area in the world. Looking at the chat here, feel free to put where you are in the world and how things are going. So thank you, Graham. Graham's in Oxfordshire as a host today, so that's where he's coming from. We've got, I think, Bob will more than likely been calling from his hometown, Minneapolis, but I'm sure he'll clarify that for us when he gets in the call. Yeah, there we go. Bob is in Minneapolis, and we've got Masood, who's in London, joining us, and we have Jennifer's in Surrey, who's obviously one of our speakers today. John in Ghana, thank you for joining us. We've all Elizabeth in Kent. Yeah, thank you for dropping into the chat. We've got Julie Fleet, who is in Newcastle. So thank you all for joining us today. We've quickly picking up participants as we go. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to give it another minute or so before I hand over to our speakers today. But just to mention, we have Learning Live digital events that are added regularly to the site. All are available to our members. But a main thank you to everybody for joining us today. You know, you guys have taken the time out to listen to what we've got to say today about, or what should I say, Graham, Jennifer, and Bob will have to say really on the subject of what's making learning matter. So, yeah, and we'll be starting in just a moment. I think we're just on the hour, but yeah. So let me just firstly take a little bit of time to introduce our speakers today. We've got Graham, Graham Hutchings, who is the CEO of Ability Business Simulations. Graham has a background in digital media and leadership consultancy, delivering change programs with clients like EDF, Dyson, Hilton. He joined ProfitAbility in early 2020 after completing an MBA at the Henley Business School. At ProfitAbility, Graham has led a digital transformation of the business, which has resulted in a rapid growth. He has a passion for creating competitive, social, and challenging learning experiences and measuring the business impact of training initiatives. Graham lives in Oxfordshire, as he mentioned earlier, with his wife and 2 young daughters. He is a founding director of a UK-based charity called Mosaic for Women UK, which supports activities to eradicate domestic violence in South Africa, which is an extremely worthwhile cause. Also today we have Jennifer Stevens, who is the Commercial Capability Manager at PepsiCo. So Jennifer has over 10 years experience in learning, specializing in leadership development and high potential development. More recently, she has moved into a commercial role, managing the capability agenda for PepsiCo's sales workforce. Jennifer's passion is creating powerful and impactful learning interventions that create real behavior change. Jennifer has recently returned to work from maternity, lives in Surrey with her fiance Lewis and 18-month-old son Oscar. Jennifer is a personal career management and leadership coach as well, accredited by the ICF. She has completed a qualification in results-based coaching through Neuro Leadership Institute, which takes a brain-based approach to coaching. And finally today we have Bob Huff, who is a global learning lead at Cargill. Bob is a learning and development leader at the global food and agricultural company Cargill. At Cargill, Bob helps design and implement learning programs for employees across commercial and sales functions, HR, finance, law, etc. His mission is to help others to get where they need to go through learning new mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets. Prior to Cargill, Bob was the head L&D at a global marketing company and also spent 15 years in advertising and brand management, working with such companies as Coca-Cola, BMW, and the Minnesota Wild NHL team. Bob holds a degree from Northwestern University, Columbia University, and lives in the suburbs of Minneapolis with his wife, 2 kids, 3 pets, and many piles of laundry, I'm hearing. So yeah, you can maybe tell us more about that. But without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Graham, who is going to be your host for this event. So maybe just 1 second while I do so. Thank you. Hello, Bob. Graham, over to you.
Well, good. Thank you very much, Richard. And yeah, thank you, as Richard was saying, to everybody for giving up a good chunk of your Tuesday, wherever you are, whether it's breakfast time, lunchtime, evening time, to join this discussion. And I can assure you it will be a discussion. We have, as far as I know, no slides prepared. So we know that in the modern age, death by webinar is a real threat. And we hope to have mitigated that threat and certainly the threat of death by PowerPoint, which is another big risk.
Yeah, we're protecting you from PowerPoint. That's our job.
Yeah. If you do start to feel unwell, though, please, you don't need to stay, but hopefully you will stay. Because Bob and Jennifer are 2 fantastic sources of knowledge and experience on this topic, and I can't wait to hear from them. Just a bit about ProfitAbility. So we specialize in helping some of the largest organizations in the world, like PepsiCo and Cargill, to accelerate the development of their people, normally in the topics of leadership development, commercial acumen, and increasingly sustainable transformation. We do this using social, experiential, game-based learning, which over the last 18 months has surged in demand, partly because I think people have realized they need to move beyond the kind of content dump and some of the kind of e-learning provision, which definitely has a place, but needs to be supported with more engaging methods of learning. But more importantly, because this approach really effectively prepares people to perform back at work. All the science suggests that we learn a little bit by listening, we learn a little bit by watching, we learn a little bit by reading, we learn a lot by doing, and critically, we learn the most by reflecting on doing in a really carefully designed way. And that's how we support the goal of making learning matter. And I guess the title of Making Learning Matter is kind of deliberately familiar, maybe a little bit provocative. It kind of responds directly to the LPI member surveys, which go out quarterly, and the most recent one I've seen from July was had kind of creating a learning culture, making learning matter, those sorts of phrases at the top of the list of challenges that LPI members, the L&D professionals are facing right now. And that's the kind of basis for the discussion today. And yeah, I'm delighted to have Bob and Jennifer. I'm not going to spend more time introducing them because Richard's done a great job of doing that. But please connect with Bob and Jennifer, and if you want myself afterwards, if you want to develop the discussion from the brief time today. Before we hear from Bob and Jennifer, we'd actually like to start hearing from you. So I'm going to attempt to put this a little question in the chat, which is, when you think of this phrase, making learning matter, not just kind of what do you think, but more specifically, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to making learning matter? Okay, so whatever your role, whatever your perspective, try not to overthink it. Just please post in the chat to that question, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to making learning matter? And between us, we'll try to pick up the thank you very much, people, to start responding to that. Jennifer, I'm going to come to you first, if I may. Thank you very much for joining us. And a question we discussed before is, when we think about making learning matter, is the challenge more making people understand the value of learning, or is it rather that learning must be more relevant and impactful than maybe it has been in recent times?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just looking at the chat and seeing some of the responses come in, it's clear that there's probably a little bit of both, but I think to a degree they're somewhat linked. I heard a really interesting quote on a podcast last week. I think it's called L&D Disrupt, the series. And it kind of referred to L&D as sometimes we put the egg comes before the chicken. And I thought that was a really interesting analogy, because I can definitely relate to that in terms of sometimes we're seen potentially to push solutions and then find a problem to match it to. And actually, we probably need to reflect and work out what's the problem that we're trying to solve. And I guess if we think about us compared to other functions, marketing don't push the same campaign. They adapt depending on the time of year, what's the business priority. So why have we maybe got this legacy perception that sometimes we just push the same thing? And I think that's often because we struggle to articulate the value up front. And I think about when I joined PepsiCo in a talent development role. I was looking after our high potential program, and we'd inherited a legacy program which was to develop some of our high potentials. But we really struggled to articulate what's the value of this program beyond the fact that we were doing something for high potentials and there was an investment to them, and that how many people were going on the program, and that they were getting promoted, but they were high potentials, so they were probably going to get promoted anyway. So actually, beyond that, what was the value? And that was the starting point, is working out what are the problems that we're trying to solve. And working with talent management helped us get real insight as to, we didn't have enough people on our bench that were in the category of they're ready. So that's a problem we need to solve. We need more people that tick that box of being ready. We were only developing a small percentage of people that were categorized as high potential. So therefore, the pool of talent was going to be much smaller. And there was lots of old school learning techniques that we were seeing in terms of classroom training and things like that. So we rebuilt that program based on having that key value and that key metric that we were going after. And I believe that because we had that value clearly outlined of what we were going after, it then enabled the program to be impactful and relevant because you're designing with that in mind. So for example, a lot of it was around, we need to find a way where people can practice these skills and finesse them before they get into role. And that's where we use challenge-based exercises for people to practice those skills. We worked with you, Graham, on a game-based learning simulation for giving managers the opportunity to practice talent management and using the different talent levers. Because they didn't have a direct report, they couldn't do it in their role. So we created that opportunity. And when I look back at, well, how do we measure that and how do we show the business the value? Well, because we had those key metrics up front, we were then able to create an evaluation process that helped us measure effectiveness against those. So we were able to prove that it was a much more scalable solution, a much more enjoyable experience because people told us they preferred it to other experiences they've been through. And we were able to show how we'd increase the skills needed to go into that next role. So I think this is about making learning matter is absolutely being able to determine what are the problems that we're trying to solve.
Awesome, thanks, Jennifer, and that's really well aligned, I think, to what the sentiment from lots of the people in the chat. So, thank you very much, everybody, for contributing your perspectives, and please continue to post questions, and I will try to field them for Bob and Jennifer. Bob, we're going to come to you with the same question, really. Kind of, is the challenge making people understand the value of learning, or making it just more relevant and impactful?
Well, I think of it as it's like diet and sleep and exercise. I mean, those, we all know that they're important. I don't think we have to convince people that learning has value or is important. I think what you said earlier about people really, especially adult learners, really want to know that it's hyper relevant to them and that they learn by doing. And then what Jennifer said is absolutely, you've got to start with what's the problem we're going to solve. And I would just take that a little bit further, which is, think about it in terms of impact, okay? And as an L&D professional, I think about this on a couple of different levels. So when we're creating or when a request for training or some kind of learning experience comes to us, I think one of the first things that you should ask out loud, we'll ask, maybe think about quietly to yourself and then maybe ask out loud skillfully, is what problem are we trying to solve, and is L&D or is training the solution? Not everything that comes to L&D is meant for L&D or is going to be solved by L&D. Now, I think in my 20 plus years of experience, a lot of people's first response to, oh, we'll just do more training. Training seems to be everyone's answer for everything. And it's not always the answer. It can be part of the answer, but it's not always. So I would give ourselves permission to say, what's really the problem here, and how might L&D help solve that problem, right? So, and then one of the things that you need to think about is defining impact. So you're going to do yourself, your team, and your leadership and stakeholders a great deal of favor by saying, we need to identify in the language of performance, skills, behavior change, what impact are we trying to affect? And we need to get consensus and define that before we really do anything else. So I think do that. And if I could say one other thing about, how do you create a kind of a culture where learning matters, is it's not just in the outcome, but it really is focused mostly on the outcome. It's in the very way you as a learning professional design, develop, and deliver the learning experience. And what I mean by that is the more you engage the stakeholders in every step of the process, the more you leverage internal subject matter experts, the more you build an agile workflow, project-based management system where you're working in increments, you're getting feedback early and often, the more you have people with skin in the game who are included and informed along the way from planning to design to development to delivery and measurement, you start to make learning matter because everybody or the people that you want to see it matter are involved, are included in aspects of the whole process. That may sound a little strange, but I've been doing this for long enough where stakeholders and sponsors find incredible appreciation for being informed more frequently, more in the loop, advised, consulted with along the way, so that it's not just, hey, L&D, go build something and tell us how it went. The more you get people with skin in the game throughout the process, the more it's going to build that culture, the more it's going to matter.
Cool. Thanks, Bob. And I think there's general agreement here on, again, judging by the sentiment of the thread and what you and Jennifer have said about kind of the context here. So I just want to move on a little bit. And Jennifer, you've had a really interesting experience over the last kind of couple of years, obviously being in L&D, then going off to do the most important job of all, have a baby, and then come back into a different role in commercial capability. So I'm really interested in your kind of perspectives. Now you're kind of looking at it from the other side almost. Part of what we were saying here is L&D needs to work more closely with business functions and move from being this kind of order taker to every single request that comes in. And yeah, here's some more content to solve this problem. Clearly, this is difficult because so many people are having the problem. The real question is, how does L&D align more closely with business functions and thereby move beyond that kind of arm's length kind of content generator to real integrated business partner?
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge of that can sometimes be that we need to not just be seen as a team that sits within an HR team, but seen as sitting within the business. And I'm not saying that means we need a reorg and L&D needs to sit separately, but I think that's often the perception, is that we're sat within that HR team, and actually how do we get ourselves a seat at the table and step away from that? And I think an element of that, or a driver of that, can be, if we think about L&D or learning at its worst, is probably when there's a lot of jargon in L&D, and if we're using that language a lot, I think that can be us at our worst, and we're kind of seen as an outsider to the business. And I think the way that we can, or from my experience of being able to be seen as sitting within the business, is using the language of our operators and our learners and our customers. And I think that's really understanding what's at the core of paying their paychecks, what enables them to deliver in their job so they get paid. And as a result of that, what are then the few metrics that we need to be going after to support them in delivery of that? And obviously, coaching, learning, innovation, creativity, everything that we do will be a part of that, that there's this focus and intent on helping somebody deliver in their job and knowing the language that they use. And one of the things I think to really help that is listening to your learners and using opportunities, because sometimes the language we use isn't what they use. We might talk about building negotiation skills, but they might talk about it as dealing with conflict or having to get a sale through. So actually, what's the language that they're using, and let's talk their language. I kind of a previous role when I was in hospitality, I remember that we used to do quad visits to a restaurant. So we'd go into that business unit, and I'd go along with the HR business partner, the finance business partner, the marketing business partner, and myself as the L&D business partner. And the reason why we'd go together is because there was no point talking to someone about their business unless we could tie it all together, unless we could come at it from a lens of end to end. How's your performance being affected from all of these things? Because that's when we can really help somebody, and that's when they're receptive to it. And I think about actually how's that been helpful kind of moving into PepsiCo and the capability role is getting, one thing that I like to do is get 15 minutes to do like a discovery tour with each of your functional teams. And not the functional leader, but somebody that's on the ground within the team. So they've got some level of responsibility in the team, and asking them a couple of questions around where are they currently at with their team, where do they need to be, and what are the barriers? And just asking those 3 questions can really give you an understanding of what's going on for them right now, what's the language that they're using, what state are they in, and giving you real insight as to how we might be able to support them. And something else that I like to ask is, what do you need from us? What do you need from me from a learning perspective? And it gives you a good data point, good feedback as to what is your brand with the business, and where do you need to flex to be more relevant for them and more supportive for them. Cool.
Bob, I'm going to ask you for your thoughts about Jennifer's comments there. Thank you. But I'm also going to throw at you Carolyn's specific question, which is, this kind of all sounds good, but how do you actually get people to buy into this concept of L&D working so much closer with the business? She says, I find people expect me to be an expert in every subject and then just go away and create training with ease without them.
Yeah, I hear that. I saw that in the chat. That's a great question. So couple things. And again, I don't want to frustrate anyone. I'm going to go back to basics though. Okay. So one of the greatest things we can do as L&D consultants or advisors is listen. Just really try to listen for the pain points, listen for where you might need to dig a little deeper to figure out, like Jennifer was saying, you sit down, have a conversation, have a really kind of intentional conversation where you're in a listening mode, just to kind of hear where the pain points, some of the barriers are. And also what I like to do is I like to time shift. So there's some tools and basic techniques you can use as an individual L&D person. It's first, show up as a human, show them that you care by listening. Okay. Then think about, hey, if we solved those problems, what would this look like 6 months, 12 months from now? So that's what I mean by time shifting. Just do a little visualization. And then you could also do some reframing of the problem from different angles. You know, how would the sale, if this is a sales situation, I work a lot with commercial people. So, you know, how, if we're saying, well, we've got a problem, our sales managers are no good. Okay, tell me more. Help me understand what you mean by sales managers are no good. From a sales rep's perspective, what might they say about their sales manager? From the customer's perspective, what might they say? From a partner internally perspective, what might they say about the sales? So these are just some of the basic things I think you start with. How you get people also just more engaged is, and explain that you're not an expert at everything, is literally say, I am here as an L&D or talent expert. My goal is to be a great collaborator and partner, but I want to, and I think there's tremendous opportunity to partner with experts in the business, because you guys have so much wealth and so much knowledge that is untapped, that if we just unleashed it, we could transform this business. And if you speak that truth and you speak it from the heart, what I'm saying is, you show that you're in this to win this as a team sport. So that's the other thing, is L&D should not be treated as this thing over here where requests go and then training comes back. And then people have to do the training and check the box and then we're all good. You're in it to win it as a team sport. This is a team sport where you are a collaborator and a partner, and you need to be an expert at L&D. Even within L&D, there's subspecialties and expertises, but you need to be an expert at L&D, but frame it differently as there are subject matter experts in your companies that have tremendous insights and tremendous wealth and tremendous deep intuitive as well as hard-won expertise that you should be looking to untap at every chance you can. And so if you frame it that way, and you say, look, we'll create a process, we'll create a way to leverage and include them either in the planning and design, or feature them as maybe, you know, pro tips in the course, or coaches or facilitators of the course. We do all these things. Slowly but surely, what you're going to show is that you're truly in it as a partner. And that to me is the key. It's that you want to be perceived. Your goal is to be perceived as an expert at L&D and as a partner who can bring an unleash or sort of tap into that really great expertise and potential that's either in plain sight or hiding in your organization.
Cool.
Great. Can I just...
I'm just going to post. Yeah, I'm going to come to you in a second. I'm just going to post on this question. So I'm going to post a question to you guys watching, to the participants. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being tactical doer, okay, and 5 being strategic partner, how would you rate your L&D department right now? It's basically feeding off what Bob's just been saying. Jennifer.
Yeah, so I was just going to build on what Bob was saying there, because obviously I've been through that exact experience that Carolyn you're referring to, around moving into this commercial capability role that I do now. I'm absolutely not an expert. My knowledge is very limited when it comes to commercial and sales. So I've really felt that in terms of not being that expert and not having all the answers. And as Bob was saying, you use the subject matter experts that you have. But one other thing is, I've really noticed that teams have influencers. There's people in teams that role model certain behaviors. They teach without knowing that they're teaching. They coach without implicitly coaching. They do these behaviors without kind of being under that learning umbrella. And sometimes it's just about getting in with them to leverage that knowledge and insight that they've got, but also capitalizing on what they're doing and sharing it much more broadly. So one thing that I would recommend, if you feel that pressure of I'm having to build and create and I don't feel like I'm the right person to be doing that, is also work out who are your influencers, because training doesn't also always need to be the answer and the solution. It doesn't need to be a classroom session, a theory or concept. It can be discussion based. It can be posting something. It can be so many different formats. But who are the people that you could tap into that might help you get to that outcome?
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, you can see from the trending of response to whether people see themselves as, or their departments as, tactical doers or strategic partners. I don't think we've had any 5s. Bob, I'm going to ask you what you would score yourself, but I'm also going to ask you, part of this, because everyone's saying this clearly must be difficult. Everyone kind of feels like I'm sure everyone's sharing these sentiments, but it's part of this around like the way the structure of how L&D is, and you're just kind of hamstrung. And linked to that, how do you, or Bob, what would your advice be about how, if you're one of these people on this call, how do you put pressure on the organization to be structured appropriately to enable this to happen? Because sometimes it seems like there just isn't the access to the right people. And linked to that, and it's a big question, but how should L&D be measuring its value? Okay, so I'm throwing 3 things at you, Bob. Well,
let me start with the 1 through 5, because I think you and I saw some comments too about if you're in a small organization and maybe you're a team of 1, right? I get that, but I got to be honest with you. I mean, I'm pretty senior level, but I do a lot of tactical stuff too. I'm kind of 1 and 5. I mean, it's not either or. I think it's yes and. So I think to be a critical partner and to be a really savvy L&D person, you've got to be able to operate at the ground level and then zoom out to 30,000 feet and understand the strategy and the vision. And you've got to be able to zoom in and out at all different altitudes. I think you've got to really think about it, because the more you understand how the tactics work or don't work, or what things, you've tried in the past or whatever, gotten your hands dirty on things. And then the more strategic, sort of higher level, how does this ladder up to our overall business goals and objectives for the fiscal year, or whatever it may be. That's really important. Okay. So I think you have to be able to zoom in and out, tactics, strategy, vision, the whole thing. I think in terms of structuring the organization, again, it's about, you have to build trust. So there's one kind of simple philosophy I have. The quickest way to build and earn trust is to execute flawlessly and to deliver what you promise that you will deliver. But I think also as you gain more trust and more confidence, it's to ask those really good, thoughtful questions that draw your stakeholders and draw your sponsors and your internal partners in, knowing that you're going to be really thoughtful about, before we spend any time, energy, or resources on X project, we're gonna make sure we ask some really important questions and qualify this so that it's really a good use of our time and energy. The more you can get a seat at the table, I think the better. And I think the more you learn, and Jennifer said this earlier, I think the more that you really understand the business, the better. So it doesn't even have to be the formal structure. It's just as you have now become a person who is interested in truly sitting literally in on meetings where you're going to learn about the business, and you're going to learn about the relationships between those people within how business gets done, how your company makes money. Sometimes I'm kind of amazed, and again, privileged because I work with a lot of our commercial teams to understand a little bit more, but I'm kind of amazed sometimes how little some of the other parts of L&D or talent understand how the business actually works. I think we really need to understand how the business works. So whether it's formally or informally in an org chart or structure, you've got to individually and advocate through your manager, through stakeholders that you're building trust with, to just be involved and inserted in more of those conversations, more of those meetings. And I think, what was the last part of it, Graham?
Just measuring, how should L&D be measuring its value? Because clearly some of the trends we've seen in the last 3 years have been in response to the way L&D is being assessed as a sort of, you need to provide this much content, tick this box that people have got access to this content, but it kind of doesn't always seem to be working. So how should L&D be measuring its value?
I think it depends. One of the ways we were measuring our value right before and during the pandemic was in our efficiency and our scalability of our solutions, so that we could relatively at a cost-effective way scale up our virtual and digital offerings. And so that was incredibly important, that L&D was responsive and effective and scalable and efficient in those ways. Now it's shifting. So I think that the definition of value can and does shift. So I think it depends on what your organization leadership values. And you need to think about it in terms of, is it about being more visible? Is it about programs that are more visible to particular segments or populations, target audiences within your organization? Is it, does your organization value participation more? Does it, in terms of the number of learners going through and completing XYZ program, right? So there's a lot of different ways to define it, but I think the ultimate holy grail, in my opinion, for our team going forward, is impact on changing behavior and driving skills that are needed for the future of how our business is transforming. So it's, can we define the KPIs about impact, skill acquisition, and behavior change? And sometimes that comes through feedback from internal sources and also from customer feedback.
Thanks, Bob. Jennifer, your perspectives on this about how L&D should be measuring its value?
Yeah, I think, as Bob said, historically, I guess our value has sometimes been demonstrated through utilization, access to certain things, which, if you've got that data, I guess that's useful because it gives you an indication of how much something's being used. So it can indicate to what degree there is that learning culture and things are being accessed. But absolutely, as Bob said, the value piece is much better in how are we driving skills and behaviors, and where's the impact that we're creating. And that starts with being really clear on the problem that you're trying to solve in the first part. So kind of what is the North Star? And that should be around skills, behaviors, even confidence in people. And one thing that I think we've got an opportunity to probably do better than what we do today, is how do we take all of that data that we have and storytell that to the business? So what we also have, in addition to quantitative data, is qualitative data around the fact that our program enabled somebody to hit their sales target. We can humanize that into actually that also made that person feel much more confident when they're talking to their customers and made them feel like a real expert. So which I don't think we do as much as we probably should, and which comes back into that whole how can we measure our value, is we can actually storytell and humanize some of our metrics a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's something we another top challenge I think on the LPI dashboard is marketing learning, or you know, promoting it internally, and like little video snippets, or you know, as you say, little testimonials from people about what the impact of this program had on, you know, me a year ago. We don't see anywhere near enough, and it's actually not that hard to do, to surface those stories. Just picking up on some of those questions, thank you very much for all of them. I'm going to do my best to try and get to some of them. Question from Elizabeth: if your business believe the solution is always face-to-face training, but you don't have the luxury of headcount to do this, how do you convince them that e-learning, webinars, maybe more scalable modes of training will deliver the same outcome?
Yeah, Graham, you want me to take that?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think we're in an era now where blended learning, you've got to have a multiple kind of front strategy where there are like little experiments you can do. I think if what we want to do is we want to have blended experiences wherever possible, but you can do little experiments to really prove out the value of virtual. And sometimes virtual can be just as effective, especially if you're doing things with small groups, peer-to-peer learning. So think about it this way. Think about, you know, 70-20-10 model of learning, right? So 10% is the formal, 20 is the social peer-to-peer, 70% is on the job application. So I think as long as you are always designing and developing your learning solutions for impact, to drive some kind of a skill acquisition or behavior change, and to Jennifer's point, increase confidence, that you should be able to try to experiment with a few different formats. So what we like to do is we like to say, you know, we'll build some digital content so that the learners can get the content that they need. We will make sure we invest in some social and peer-to-peer learning or coach-led, facilitator-led learning. And that's typically, because I'm in a global organization, much easier to do virtually. And then you can have a version of that in person. So if you want to really get together in person, and you know it's a local thing, or you're flying people in anyway and you want to do it in person, that's great. But I think you should be flexible, and I think the mindset should be, wherever possible, try to create a blended experience. And if you really have to convince people that kind of hold the purse strings, is to say, let's just do a couple of experiments and let's get the feedback to see how this really went. You know, let's get the learner, let's get our learners to tell us. Because I honestly have seen some of these virtual experiences and really be very impactful. And people really, to me, really love small group learning, and they love facilitated coach-led learning. And so that to me was not really hard. But once learners and leaders saw that, they really embraced it.
Yeah. And Rebecca's asked a really good question, just building this, which I can add a similar question, which is, how do you link the change in skilled behaviors that you're after directly to the type of learning that you're designing, whether it's on the job, mentoring, training? She always gets that challenge, and accounting for the variables. And it's something we deal with a lot. Like, no one's going to use like game-based learning for teaching like closed skills, like teaching people how to code or whatever.
Right.
That could definitely be, or learn the violin. Like, you can do that through YouTube, like by yourself. But like leadership development skills, sustainable transformation, if you have to get people together to do that stuff. So yeah, how would you respond to Rebecca's question there? Either Jennifer or Bob.
Yeah, I can
go on, Jennifer.
So I think, I mean, it's interesting because I think it works both ways, doesn't it? Sometimes if those metrics aren't great, we're not going to attach them to our solution, and if they are great, we are going to attach them to our solution. So I think it starts with being really clear up front. What are the problems that we're trying to solve? What does that look like from a metrics and a value perspective, and having a clear indication of what they might be? And then you're isolating what you're going after, so the solution is really targeted and relevant. And when you've got a relevant and targeted solution, I think it's really hard to then not attach it to those metrics, because it was built with that purpose in mind. But ultimately, when we're working with leadership behaviors, there will be other elements that come into that. So that does need to also be factored in. And I definitely see that in functional capability as well. We've had to look at building specific functional skills around financial literacy. But what I've observed is all roads lead to leadership development. And actually, if somebody's not able to, if they're struggling with something in their role, it's probably a leadership or an environmental cultural change that's happened. Most of our jobs have very, very little functional knowledge unless we are a rocket scientist. And actually, when we used game-based learning with profitability in terms to build that financial literacy, what we saw is other leadership skills being practiced and applied and therefore developed, such as how to think more strategically, how to think more end-to-end about other business functions, which wasn't something that was in our metric to begin with, but as a consequence, we saw that. So that was a direct result of the training, and it was an observation that we could use to bring back to the business as how we were developing not just one isolated skill, but other skills as well. And I think that's where that storytelling and that data piece work together to share that picture and influence the business.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. I'm conscious we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to post a final question, because of our approach, we learn by reflecting on doing. So there's been a ton of stuff that Jennifer and Bob have shared, which we will also summarize in a kind of email to the people who signed up to it. But the question going in, what's been your biggest insight or inspiration from today's discussion? And something that you might not think is relevant might be really relevant to someone else. So please just share what you are taking away from today's discussion to help other people. And Bob, I'm just going to throw Richard. Have you got time for one more question? Or we?
Yeah, feel free. Pose a last question, then I'll finish things up. Yeah.
We're not going to have time to get through everything, so please do connect with Bob and Jennifer. I know they're happy to connect on LinkedIn to continue the discussion. And this peer mentoring and peer social learning is critical to enable progress in this space. Bob, it's actually up to you. There's a few good questions coming in there. Any final comments from you, or any questions you particularly want to respond to?
Well, I just wanted to touch base on the question before that Jennifer answered, which is to just get really crisp and crystal clear about your learning objectives. Make sure that your learning objectives connect to the impact that you're that you've agreed to with your stakeholders, your project sponsor, whomever. Just make sure learning objectives, they're there for a reason. They should be written in very clear, precise language so that they ladder up to and tie directly to your impact. I would just say overall, there's a lot of questions. I'd love to get into them in the chat, but what I will say is just sort of final thoughts is, I think being an L&D is an incredibly privileged position. I think the more that we show up in a true mindset of partnership, that we're learning too, that we're on a learning journey along with the organization, that it's a team sport, that we definitely want to make an impact, right? So just every day, I literally think about how can I make an impact today? And sometimes it's more obvious and less obvious, more subtle, maybe more explicit, but it's a team sport. How do I make an impact? And how do I keep growing and learning to be of more value to the organization? And that it's a process. So the last thing I'll say is that this is a journey. We're all on it. And, I hope I'm never done growing and learning and evolving, but this is a journey and this is a process. So the more you can help people see that and buy into that and go and build that trust to go along with you on that journey, the more success you're going to have.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks, Jennifer and Bob together. Like, you've been super giving up your time, and like, yeah, everyone's in this together, right? And so let's continue the discussion and knowledge sharing, which really helps. So really appreciate the LPI and you, Richard, for giving us this opportunity.
No, we appreciate you, Graham, for bringing this together, and Stephen, Jennifer, Bob, both of you have done an amazing job here. I just touching on what you said there are resources that you're going to send out to those that have consented to marketing, which we score at marketing, but at the same time, it's about communication. We're going to be sending out, or Graham will be sending out, some reference materials to today's podcast. But really, I just want to, reiterate the thanks. As I've seen in the chat there, it's been really positive around the comments that have been had. The transcript of the conversation that has been had today is going to be shared with Graham, Jennifer, and Bob for them to work through. So don't feel that they haven't seen it. They are actively encourage you to link in with them on their profiles so that you can engage with them and keep the conversation moving forward, as Graham mentioned. But yeah, really, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Graham, for your time today. It's been a really good session, so thank you. It really leads me finally to sort of remind some of the key dates coming up. We've got the next Learning Live Networks event on the 2nd of November, which is going to be at the Leonardo Royal St Paul's Hotel in London at 12:15. For those members that are attending, there's information on the website with the agenda on there. Also, post that, we've got the Learning Awards. We've got a few key dates coming up. We've got some judging sessions, importantly. Shortlisting actually happens in a few days' time. So yeah, and then we've got the event itself, the Learning Awards, on the 22nd of February 2024. So that's our next large event that we're going to be hosting. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. I think I've given you all the information that you need, and I think I'm sure Graham and Jennifer and Bob have done the same. So thank you all for taking your time out today. It's very much appreciated, and I will end the session in just a few moments. Once you guys have finished thanking us all for the chat. All right. Thank you, guys. All the best.